Texas has a reputation for being tough on crime, but beneath the surface, in the darkness, is an incredible number of mysteries left undone.
There are monsters among us.
There are approximately 20,000 unsolved homicides throughout the Lone Star State, cases that have gone cold, waiting for new information or evidence. On Gone Cold Podcast, Texas True Crime, we tell in-depth stories of these unsolved murders and missing persons cases, from the historic and mysterious 1948 disappearance of Denton co-ed Virginia Carpenter to the unspeakably brutal 2014 slaying of Delisa Kelly in Dallas.
This was personal. It was personal.
Join us weekly as we attempt to keep these terrible and tragic stories alive in hopes the victims' loved ones can one day see justice. You can subscribe to Gone Cold, Texas True Crime, wherever you listen to podcasts.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we're going to start with a little bit of breaking true crime news today. We are going to talk about the shooting on the set of Rust, the Western low budget, by which we mean $7 million for a budget, which doesn't seem low to me, movie of which Alec Baldwin is prominently attached. What better person to take us through that process than Bill Thomas, Hollywood expert extraordinaire, here to talk to us about all of the ins and outs of the film and television industry. Mr. Thomas, give us a little bit of background about your role in the film and TV industry to start us off.
Well, let me push back against the Hollywood extraordinaire, or whatever it was you said. Thank you. I have worked in entertainment for a number of years. Most people who listen to the podcast think of me as the brother of a murder victim and you and I as true crime podcasters and so on. But in a previous life, I was a senior exec with SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, which is the labor union that represents actors, broadcasters, and sound recording artists. And about 2/3 of the membership are working actors like Alec Baldwin. After leaving SAG-AFTRA, I worked for the American Federation of Musicians in a similar leadership role as the head of the West Coast office. After that, I was with the IATSE, the Art Directors Guild, specifically, which is the labor union that represent people that create the visuals that you see on set. And it's other IATSE locals who are representing a lot of what they call the below-the-line personnel on film and television sets and are pivotal to what happened on the set of Rust.
And as soon as I heard the breaking story of there's been a shooting on the set of Rust, of course, the first person I thought to call was my true crime partner, but also, hey, Bill probably knows a whole lot about this because he is film and TV adjacent. So I figured that if anybody was going to have big opinions on this, it would be you.
Thanks. First of all, what we're talking about is a tragic accident. Yeah. But I also think it's now been a week since the accidental shooting on the set of Rust in New Mexico. And it's starting to come together now as law enforcement is moving forward with their investigation that there was significant negligence on the set. And I think that the death of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins and the pretty serious injury to director Joel Souza are going to likely result in civil suits and perhaps criminal charges being filed as well.
Now, what first came to mind for me as a person of a certain age was how reminiscent this felt, at least on the surface, to the shooting of Brandon Lee during the production of The Crow back in the day. And I do want to get into a little bit later how similar these are or whether there are differences between the two. But certainly that's what first came up for me, because that is something that I vividly remember. This is not a one-off. There are accidents like this on sets all the time, but this one is pretty unique. So for anybody who's not aware of what's been happening on the set of Rust, can you quickly go through the circumstances surrounding this tragic accident?
On Thursday, October 21st, in New Mexico, at the set of a Western, a contemporary Western being shot. The film is set in Kansas in 1880, and it's actually based around a story that involves an accidental killing, ironically.
Very ironically.
It appears that producer and star Alec Baldwin has accidentally shot and killed the cinematographer, the director of photography, Halyna Hutchins, as well as injuring the director, Joel Souza, while practicing with an old-fashioned gun like you would see in a Western, practicing doing something called cross-drawing, which can be dangerous in that it involves potentially aiming a weapon at the camera. Now remember, the camera is not just a highly technical set of lenses and computer cables. And in this case, the camera, which was a B camera, was also on a dolly. There's also a camera operator who is running that camera, making certain that the camera is in proper focus. Supervising that shooter, as they're often called, that is the B camera photographer, is the cinematographer, sometimes called the director of photography. And that's a very talented young woman named Halyna Hutchins. Also in the line of fire in this example is the director Joel Souza. And what appears to have happened is that Alec Baldwin was handed a gun, and he was assured by assistant director Dave Halls, Halls, that this was what is referred to as a cold gun. In other words, this is a gun that does not contain live rounds and can be used on a set safely. Unfortunately, what happened is that Baldwin, in practicing firing this gun, he's supposed to be involved in a gunfight in a church set in the Old West, and he's backing out of the church, engaged in a gunfight, and they want to capture this, obviously, on film. It's not film anymore, but we still call it film.
Sure, yeah.
What happened was the gun accidentally discharged. Baldwin's finger was on the trigger. What they initially called a projectile, and then they called a lead object, and now they're referring to it as a live round. So this is a real bullet, it appears, based on reports. The bullet flew out of the gun after Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger. It went very closely, but past the B camera operator's head, but then crouched behind him, looking at a small video monitor to see if she got the shot that she wanted, was Halyna Hutchins. Directly behind Halyna Hutchins was Joel Souza, the director. He's in charge of the production on an overall basis. Halyna Hutchins was struck in the stomach. Some articles have said the chest. The bullet was a through and through. It went through her and then entered Joel Souza's shoulder. In the confusion, they weren't immediately aware of who had been hit, of course. Halyna Hutchins collapsed and then began bleeding from a wound on her back almost immediately, and she apparently said something about not being able to feel her legs. Souza was struck in the shoulder. Now, it's actually resulted in, after both of them receiving medical attention, they were able to recover the bullet from Souza's shoulder. For Halyna Hutchins, she took the brunt force of the bullet. Now, keep in mind, this is a New Mexico ranch that has been used for a number of different Westerns, but you're way out in the middle of nowhere. And although there is first aid available, you are 50, 60 miles from a major medical center. What resulted then was they gave Halyna Hutchins first aid, but they were not able to stop the bleeding. Around here, we call them Lifestar helicopters. She was loaded aboard a helicopter and flown to a trauma center where she died. And my understanding is that Joel Souza was transported by ground in an ambulance or something like that. He has survived his injuries. What's very unfortunate is there's all kinds of violations of protocol here and safety issues just all over the place. Our friend Bobby Chacon, former FBI agent and consultant to a number of films and television shows, has said repeatedly in interviews in the last few days how he keeps repeating these gun safety mantras on every production that he works on, to the point where he said, cast and crew roll their eyes. But the truth of the matter is, you can't say these things often enough because they absolutely are sacrosanct. I know when we're watching an old-fashioned Western or a detective show or whatever it is, you want the action to be exciting and realistic and compelling and all that. I get it. And look, I don't mind a show where cowboys shoot things up or a bad guy gets shot at the end of the movie or whatever it is. In your search for realism, you cannot forget the fact that guns, be they prop guns or real guns, are weapons, and they can result in injury or death. And that's exactly what happened here. And this is a completely preventable tragedy.
For anyone in our listening audience who may not be familiar with who takes care of the weapons and who is in charge of their storage and their safety, give them a little bit of an overview of what an armorer does on set and the kind of credentials they need to have.
Yeah, the armorer on this set is a very young woman, age 24, named Halyna Gutierrez Reed. She is probably not well qualified to be the head armorer on a production of this scale. This is a very low budget film, $6 to $7 million, which I know that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money in my world, and it's a lot of money in yours. But $6 to $7 million to make a full-length motion picture that's going to run an hour and a half is not a lot of money. Movies cost tens of millions up to hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, to make an old-fashioned Western on a low budget, maybe this is a reasonable figure. But Halyna Gutierrez Reed is 24 years old, which I said to you before we started, I'm not sure, with all due respect to her, that she'd have the gravitas to enforce rules that are extremely important. Film productions are under a tremendous amount of pressure to get the job done. This is a very short, independent level shoot that is 21 days long. That's not a long time. This probably should have been a 30-day shoot, but obviously every day that you can chop off of a shooting schedule can save you money. It's worth noting that Halyna Gutierrez Reed is the daughter of a pretty legendary armorer. His name is Thal Reed, and she was only on her second movie. And it's also worth talking about that her first movie, another Western, which I'm not sure has actually been released yet, with Nicolas Cage, called The Old Way in August 2021. She was the armorer on that film, and she was heavily criticized for not following safety protocols, sloppy work. Actually, Nicolas Cage screamed at her and walked off set after she discharged weapons, and he had headphones on, and he screamed at her saying, "You just blew my blank eardrums out." He wanted her fired for lack of safety protocols, and there were what they call accidental discharges, that is, guns going off when they aren't supposed to be going off, on the set of The Old Way. She even admitted in a podcast that ran after the shooting of The Old Way, the production of The Old Way, that she wasn't certain that she was really qualified, but that things had gone very well. Although it seems like some of her cast and crew from The Old Way might beg to differ that things went well. This is one of those situations where, in an effort to save money, productions are hiring people who are not well qualified. Further, they asked Hannah Gutierrez-Reed to do 2 jobs. She was hired to handle props, which is a very important job. That's everything you see on set. Think about a Western with all of the different atmospheric pieces of furniture and equipment. Everything you see, those things are handled by prop masters. And she was asked to be in charge of props and the armorer, and those are both full-time jobs. Unfortunately, they were hiring only about 2 weeks out prior to shooting beginning.
That's crazy.
Now,
that is crazy.
Veteran prop master Neil Zoromsky told the Los Angeles Times a few days ago in an interview that he had turned the job down as prop master on Rust, saying that they were cutting corners and that he had asked for a staff of 4 or 5 to include an armorer, and they didn't want to give him the sufficient number of people to do the jobs. And he said to the Los Angeles Times there were, quote, massive red flags, unquote, on Rust. And the fact that they were hiring only 2 weeks out instead of what he said would be typically several months out. And then he said he heard that they were hiring Hannah Gutierrez-Reed to handle both props and the armor. He said this is an accident waiting to happen, not specifically criticizing her, but he turned the job down because he had concern about safety. There's another guy who plays a very key role here, and he may ultimately be one of the people who's found responsible for what happened on Rust. He's the assistant director, and his name is Dave Halls, as we mentioned. He's the one that actually handed the revolver. We're talking about an old-fashioned revolver like you would see in a Western. He handed the gun to Baldwin, and he called out cold gun, which is industry standards understand that to be that this gun is safe to use. A lot of people are pointing to him as possibly negligent in this shooting. Now, Dave Halls was nearly fired on another movie he worked on in 2019, where he did very sloppy work and there were accidental discharges, which means a gun going off when it's not supposed to go off, on the set of that film. Again, now we have the producers, and you've got to steer back to Alec Baldwin and the other producers on this movie. They're the ones that are hiring these people. So they appear to be hiring individuals who have a sloppy track record, particularly on safety. Remember, the goal of the 21-day shoot is to do principal photography, but there's a really profound responsibility on the part of the producers to make certain that you go out and you get the raw material that you're going to make the movie from, but you're not supposed to be killing or injuring your cast or crew. You have a responsibility to these people, and that appears to be completely absent here.
Now, I'm teaching a film course this semester and next semester too. Of course, with this having been in the news recently, my film kids are coming in every day going, Miss Dilley, did you hear about what happened? Well, yes, of course I did. And they've been wanting to talk about it. And so they were overflowing yesterday, like coming in the door. They were trying to be the first person to go, wait, did you hear that they were target shooting on the set of Rust? Can you confirm that they were, in fact, doing some target shooting on the set of Rust? When I heard this, and I had heard it before the kids, but I let them think that they informed me because I'm a cool teacher like that. I did tell them, you guys, that's crazy. I had heard about it, but let's go ahead and get you on record here, Mr. Thomas. Were they actually doing target shooting on the set of Rust, which would have resulted in that live ammo?
Well, there are a number of reports. Now, we can't say that they're completely confirmed, but there have been a number of reports about several different problems. One is, and I'm seeing this figure from more than one source and from reliable newspapers online, that there were upwards of 500 rounds found on set, and that there was
crazy.
A mix of different types of bullets, dummy bullets, blanks, which still contain a powerful charge, but are not supposed to be able to propel the business end of a bullet down a barrel. That's one of the things they believe happened to Brandon Lee on the set of The Crow a number of years ago. A blank propelled something in the barrel with sufficient force to kill him. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. Many of you know that Othram is leading the way in DNA testing, helping law enforcement solve missing persons, homicides, and sexual assault cases across the United States and Canada using forensic-grade DNA tests.
You can help this important cause by contributing funds and your DNA profile to Othram's free site, DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps.
Now DNA Solves has added another new feature, DNA Solves Connect, which will allow you to upload your DNA profile to help law enforcement, even if you've never used one of the commercial genealogy sites.
If you're looking for a missing family member or have lost touch with someone, DNA Solves Connect is an incredible option at only $14.95.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com.
Join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
We're back here at Mind Over Murder. The possibility that there were crew members shooting weapons after hours is beyond the beyond. You don't want to have live weapons with live ammunition on a movie set. This stuff should have never happened, but it's been widely reported and in a number of different sources that after hours, crew was going out and plinking. That is, and I've done it. You know, you go out and shoot cans and bottles out in the desert somewhere. There's some reporting that says that the weapon that Alec Baldwin accidentally discharged was one of those guns.
Oh, my gosh.
So here we go again with sloppy weapons handling. Hannah Gutierrez Reed should have never allowed this stuff to happen. These guns should have been locked up. Apparently, they were locked up in a safe during a break just before this incident, which happened, I think, around 1 or 1:30 in the afternoon. Even Dave Halls, the assistant director, he's the one that handed the gun to Baldwin. He's supposed to be the last line of defense, if you know what I mean, to make certain that a weapon is not going to hurt somebody inadvertently. He himself admits that he looked down at the 3 bullets that were in the chamber but didn't spin the chamber to make certain that there was nothing else there, and he didn't sight down the barrel to make certain that there was nothing in the barrel. And as we talked about, you can have something that's lodged in the barrel, which can be the bullet, and that can be propelled out through the small explosion that takes place when you pull the trigger on a weapon. So there's all kinds of problems here with gun safety and lack of appropriate protocols. Ultimately, I think the responsibility falls on Hannah Gutierrez Reed as the armorer, but then Dave Halls is responsible for handing Alec Baldwin a weapon, insisting it's a cold gun and announcing that to everyone who was on set at that moment. Ultimately, the producers of this motion picture, I think they are actually ultimately responsible for this. Now, I don't know if Alec Baldwin would be found criminally liable or Hannah Gutierrez Reed or Dave Halls or anyone else involved in the production would be criminally charged, and I'm not an attorney. But it's important to note that the buck really stops with the people at the top, which is the producers of Rust. Now, it's interesting. I've seen some statements from Rust Productions. They set up these companies on a one production only basis, partly to limit their liability in situations like this. If someone is hurt or, heaven forbid, killed, and there's a lawsuit, they're not going after, let's just say, XYZ major production company who might be underwriting this movie, but they're only going after Rust Productions. But even Rust Productions issued some really, I thought, kind of weak statements about not officially having any complaints about safety on set. That's ludicrous, because there were things going on the day of the accident that are extremely important to note. 7 crew members who were members of the IATSC, the union I used to work for, walked off set that day and packed up their things and said they were leaving. They disputes, which stretched back all the way towards the beginning of the production, centered around safety issues. Mm-hmm. The crew complained, and this is primarily the camera crew, the people that worked for and with Halyna Hutchins, who was apparently very upset about the fact that they were leaving, but she also supported them. They were unhappy because of a number of problems. First of all, apparently they'd been promised hotel rooms in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is closer to the ranch where they were shooting. Apparently, after production began, they were told, oh no, you have to stay in Albuquerque. Now, the hours on set are extremely long. They can be 12, 13, 14 hours. And this can be on your feet in the heat, oftentimes standing still. So it can be really, really exhausting, particularly for the camera crew, because nothing gets made for a movie or a television show without the camera crew. So cameras rolling is key to trying to get as much production done in the short 21 days that you have. So the crew was promised rooms in Santa Fe, which is closer. They ended up getting rooms in Albuquerque, which is 50 miles away. Now you're talking about a situation where the crew could be working 12, 13, 14 hours, and now they're being forced to drive an hour each way back to their hotel rooms. Think about it. You know, you're getting a 12, 13, 14-hour day plus 2-hour round trip, an hour at each end, and you're supposed to get 8 hours sleep. Mm-hmm. I mean, are they going to get some dinner? You know, the whole thing. And if you're doing this day after day after day on this very concentrated shoot schedule, this gets exhausting. And so the crew was very upset about what they see as a safety issue. The IATSE was just coming off major labor negotiations, and one of the major sticking points in those negotiations was trying to cut down the number of hours and make certain that they don't have to drive an hour each way, because it just results in more and more exhaustion. And there have been a number of IATSE people who've been actually killed driving to and from work because they work such long hours. Further, the camera crew, as we talked about, everything is always about cameras rolling, cameras rolling, cameras rolling. So you're always trying to set up the next shot, get as much work done as you can in these long days. The crew is often pushed so hard they are not allowed to take breaks. So they're asked to work through their breaks. They're asked to eat standing up. They're supposed to be union-required work breaks. And they're there for a reason. These guys and gals are expected to stand by their equipment for hour after hour after hour. I mean, without getting too graphic, people have to go to the bathroom. They have to stretch their legs. They have to have something to eat. They have to have some water. But of course, here you are out in the heat of the New Mexico desert, and they always tell us to stay hydrated. Well, guess what? If you need to go to the bathroom, how are you supposed to do that? They push these crews harder and harder and harder, and these were major issues in the recent IATSE negotiation. What ended up happening on the set of Rust is 7 members of the camera crew specifically walked off the job and said, that's it, we're done. On the day of the shooting, and this may be related to some of the kind of chaos that was going on around the set of Rust on that day, 7 people walked off set from the camera crew and said, we're done. We're having difficulty with our hotels, with safety, with the long hours. And there was one other issue, which is they weren't getting paid properly and on time. Mm-hmm. They're actually being ordered to leave set by the producers. And actually, it got apparently pretty tense. At least one member of the production told the departing camera crew members that if they didn't leave set immediately, security was going to kick them out. So things are not good. And then their replacements, non-union camera crew, had come in. And Halyna Hutchins was extremely unhappy about her people, the people that she was working with and people she had probably chosen for those jobs, walking off the set. You can see there's tension on the set. There's some degree of chaos. There are people that are in active disagreement. Supposedly, Dave Halls, the assistant director, was screaming at the script supervisor regarding changes over lunch. And even in the 911 call for medical assistance, the script supervisor is overheard saying to someone else that blankety blank AD, assistant director, she means Dave Halls, who was screaming at me, is the one that was responsible for checking the gun before it was handed to Alec Baldwin. So you can see that certain people are probably going to take the fall for this thing. I have to paint a picture that presents everything that was going on set, cutting corners and trying to do things on the cheap, which helped create a situation where you can have a tragic accident take place.
This really does sound like a perfect storm, and it's certainly not anything that you would ever want to encounter. What can we expect? I know you can't speak for all of the film industry, but what could we expect to change on sets in the near future to keep this from happening?
There's a lot of people already talking about changing how guns are used on set, and perhaps that live ammunition needs to become a thing of the past, and that it might actually be smart, and we're going to have to see if this can be worked out, that there's a fair amount of work that happens in post-production, that is, as they put the movie together and sound effects are added, background music, special effects, and, there's a lot of stuff that happens after principal photography. Some people are saying, we could add gunshots and the sound of gunshots, muzzle flare, and, whatever, you would see in a realistic depiction of a gun going off, that these things might be able to be added later. I also think, without question, seeing as how law enforcement is reporting 500 rounds of ammunition were found on set, which is way too much, and then the mix of these various types of ammunition up to and including live rounds, I think live rounds are going to be completely forbidden on sets from here on out. And I think the role of armorers is going to be taken much more seriously. I think you're going to see a real effort to prevent the kind of corner cutting that happened on the set of Rust in future productions, even if they are lower budget films and television shows.
So what's going to happen legally as we proceed further into this investigation about what happened on the Rust set?
Well, first of all, it's very striking that the Rust producers have immediately lawyered up. They hired a very well-known Los Angeles and New York law firm, Jenner & Bach, to conduct an investigation into what happened on the set of Rust. But keep in mind, Jenner & Bach represent the Rust producers and are getting paid a lot of money, I'm sure, to present the best possible case, shall we say, in terms of what happened on the set of Rust. A little bit
of bias there, just a little.
Well, they have a job to do. I'm not casting aspersions on the work that Jenner and Bach are doing and are going to do. They're there to represent the interests of Rust producers. At the same time, there's a criminal investigation going on, and there's a lot of work that's being done there with New Mexico authorities. The FBI is involved because the 500 rounds of ammunition and the guns involved and so on have all been sent to FBI Quantico for analysis. I know the story has shifted a little bit as law enforcement in their press conferences have released more information. They are now using the expression live round regarding the round that hit and killed Halyna Hutchins and injured Joel Souza. Now that it was removed from his body, and they've been able to put together a little bit more of the story about what happened. Dave Halls has already submitted an affidavit where he admitted that he did not properly inspect the weapon and that he isn't sure if he spun the barrel. This would probably be a 6-shooter, if you think about your old Westerns, and that he could see probably 3 bullets in the chamber, but wasn't sure what was in the other bullets. That's very, very problematic. It's also come out that Armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed had locked up the weapons during what I think is probably a short lunch break, but that there were these hundreds of rounds of ammunition all around and unsupervised. As we talked about, there are reports, multiple reports, but not completely confirmed yet, that the weapon that Alec Baldwin accidentally discharged may have actually been the gun or one of the guns used by crew to go out plinking. So you can see all kinds of problems developing here. And I just see negligence all over the place. I'm not an attorney, but I don't think that negligent homicide would be off the table. I did notice that Alec Baldwin had reached out to Halyna Hutchins' husband and son, who obviously are in shock. And he spent time with them, and he's obviously trying to maintain a good and cordial and positive relationship with them. Ultimately, they might take legal action against the producers and against some of the people that we've talked about here. And ultimately, this is going to be about the decisions that the producers made, which created this situation. And I think, without question, there's negligence all over the place in this movie. I'm actually not 100% certain this movie is going to get completed.
Yeah, probably not.
In other situations, like Twilight Zone, the movie, and The Crow, those films were completed despite terrible accidents. Vic Morrow and 2 child actors were killed on the set of Twilight Zone, the movie, in a terrible helicopter crash. Mm-hmm. There were violations of having these young kids on set after hours. You know, it was beyond the hours that young children are supposed to be on set, according to SAG-AFTRA rules. But that movie ultimately came out, and even The Crow, where Brandon Lee was killed, ultimately was released. Mm-hmm. And as we talked about, there's always this pressure to, keep working, get the shots, get the work done, and so on. There may be pressure ultimately that builds on the production team for Rust to actually finish the film, although I'm not sure about that. I noticed that Alec Baldwin was photographed the other day in Vermont with his family, obviously extremely upset about what happened. Some friends who were sort of commenting for him had said that this is sometimes what he does after something important, hurtful, disappointing, whatever has happened, which is to kind of step back, spend time with family, and kind of think about things and then stay out of the public eye. And of course, he's being followed by paparazzi who are trying to get the shot of Alec Baldwin. But for the most part, he just is, walking with his family in town, grabbing a coffee in Vermont. But you notice he is nowhere near New Mexico.
Yeah.
I am pretty confident that law enforcement probably would want to interview him further as they learn more details about what happened on set. But of course, when you're Alec Baldwin, contact my lawyer will be their response. And I'm sure his defense attorneys, and he's probably got some good ones, are going to be doing everything they can to make certain that his personal liability is as limited as possible and that he crafts his storytelling about what happened in a very, very careful way. Interestingly, he's tweeted out 2 articles without comment, 2 articles that highlighted Dave Hall's, the assistant director's role in handing him a gun, assuring him it was a cold gun, and of course it was not.
Is this a career-ending move for Alec Baldwin, or do you think he'll be able to rebound?
I'm not sure. I would say that Dave Hall's career as an assistant director is likely over. I would say that Hannah Gutierrez Reed will never work on a movie or a television show again. I'm not sure about Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin's going to have a hard time recovering from this, I think. If I were Alec Baldwin, I think I would take some time off, some significant time, spend time with family, keep an extremely low profile, maybe take a year off, maybe longer. It's not for me to offer him career advice. What happened was an absolutely terrible accident. I don't think it's really Alec Baldwin's fault, but blame will be assigned. And I think there's plenty to go around in a situation like this where there is negligence, perhaps bordering on criminal negligence.
Thank you very much for your insight, Mr. Thomas. And that's going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.